Welcome back, now in Module 9, and here we are going to take a look at a new topic, and that is biblical law and salvation. As I mentioned briefly in the previous lecture, that there is something in many people's mind that law is cold, unfeeling, and why is there so much law in the Bible? Why do Christians have to talk so much about law? And couldn't we talk about pleasanter things and so on? Well, we want to take a look at this whole concept, and the first lecture in this series is lecture A, and that is the pattern of Old Testament law. Because in the Old Testament, the concept of law is very, very widespread. And I think the reason for that is that we get the impression, not only in the Bible, but also in reality, that God is a God of law and order. In other words, God is concerned with maintaining order, maintaining stability in the universe. And when you take a look, for example, what scholars of the Bible call general revelation, which would be what can we know about God from science and experience and history and so forth. And as we look at that general revelation, we discover a number of things about God. First of all, it's very, very clear that the universe seems to be governed to some degree by law, in the sense of gravity, for example. Gravity, I think, is it's very helpful in many ways. And if gravity were not consistently there, that would be a problem. Just imagine if you woke up the next day and you were on the ceiling. That could be very disorienting, especially if cabinets and all kinds of things were falling down on top of you because gravity had suddenly reversed. We depend on gravity. We depend on it being consistent. We like it to be there in the morning when we wake up. And so gravity, I think, is one way that through our experience we have a certain sense that if the universe is governed by laws, as we would call it, if gravity is consistently engaged throughout the universe, then it's dependable. And I think the important thing about law is dependability. It is security. Laws are there to regulate human behavior, to regulate in the Bible the way we relate to God and the way God relates to us. And it means it provides a certain amount of security. So we certainly depend on that kind of stability, consistency, security in our lives. Another example is friction. We don't think about this very often, but most of our lives are dependent on friction. For example, right now, if I wanted to walk in this direction, what I need is friction. You say, how? Well, because my feet are on the floor. And if I want to propel myself this way, I'm going to need there to be enough sticky stuff, so to speak, on the floor. In other words, there has to be enough friction. If there were zero friction on the floor, what would happen? I would move my foot behind me in order to move forward, but it would not encounter any resistance. And because of that, my foot would not be able to propel me in this direction. So friction is very important. Because friction is there, I can push back with my feet. I don't even think about this most of the time, do you? But you push back with your foot and you're moving forward, and by pushing back each time, you keep moving. Oh, I'm gone, see? Just like that. But if there were no friction on the floor right here or anywhere that we operate, we would not be able to propel ourselves in any given direction. It would be like the slickest ice that you have ever experienced. I remember the last year I lived in Michigan, going out for a walk. And when I returned from that walk, I went across the driveway, and during my walk, the driveway had apparently frozen over. Just a very thin sheet is what they call black ice, and it looked like a normal driveway. And I just hit that driveway, and the next thing I knew, I was completely horizontal to the ground, about 3 feet off the ground, and I realized this is not a good thing. I have no idea where I'm going to land. Am I going to land on my head? Am I going to land on my feet? I just knew it was not a good thing, and I had no control over it, and I ended up landing on my right shoulder. And it wasn't quite the same for at least 6 months after that. Now I live in California, don't have to worry about icy sidewalks, and that's certainly a blessing. To have no friction at all really would not be a lot of fun, at least for long. So we learn that the rules of the universe tend to be somewhat inexorable. They're there. You can count on them, and you also ignore them at your peril. For example, I'll give you another consistent law. Let me take a pencil, yellow pen, okay? All right. Now, let's test the consistency of the universe here, okay? I'm going to hold this pen right before you, and I'm going to let it go. And the big question is it going to go up? Is it going to go down? Is it going to go right or left? Which way is it going to go? Well, let's see. There it went, okay? Now, it went down. Were you surprised by that? Well, let's test it again. Let's just see if anything has changed between the time I dropped the first time and this time. Oh, there it goes again. You see? It's consistent. We count on it. Gravity is there consistently. The rules of the universe are there consistently. And if I'm standing in a window, and if I imagine that if I step out of that window on the 20th floor of a hotel, if I imagine that stepping out of that window, I'll be able to float up into the air and have a grand old time up there, I'm going to be mistaken. The laws of the universe are consistent. When you disobey them, when you act in ways that are not in your own self-interest in relation to that law, bad things happen. Serious consequences happen. So in our experience, it becomes clear that the universe has certain laws by which it operates, that they are consistent, inexorable, that when you disobey them or ignore them, bad consequences happen. This at least teaches us something about what God is like. Now, I'm aware in making this kind of a comment that there is such a thing as quantum physics, and that at a subatomic level, some of these laws don't seem to function in quite the same way that they do. But the reality is none of us lives at the subatomic level. And maybe there's a Bible for these subatomic particles down there, I don't know. But the reality is we do live in the macro world in which these laws of physics function and provide for us a certain stability. And thus, in a sense, law could be understood as an analogy or as a metaphor for the consistency that God seeks to build in his relationship with us. When you get to the Bible, of course, there's no question that the Bible is full of legal terminology. All kinds of language for law, for judgment, for statutes, commandments, legal regulations, etc., law courts. The Bible is full of legal language. Perhaps every part of the Bible has terminology like that. And as we look at the larger picture, we see a God who would rather suffer the cross than violate the law in order to save us. There's something about that law that God respects, and even God chooses to be subject to. Evidently, law is really, really important for our survival. Really, really important for the stability of the universe. And so as we look at the Bible and as we look at the universe, I think the wise conclusion is that God is a being of law and order. And if God is a being of law and order, then it's not surprising that the scriptures are laid out in that same way. I would also like to suggest that human beings are beings of law and order. That if we lived in a context in which there was no consistency, no reliability, no idea of what is right and wrong, human beings don't function very well. You see, human beings are quite different in this from animals. I'm not sure I have ever seen an animal lie. Have you? You know, has an animal ever, have you ever come in and this dog says, I'm going to really fool him. I'm going to wag my tail and I'm going to put my tongue out and go, hey, I'm going to make all the signals that I just love this human being that walked in the door. And as soon as he gets over here, I'm going to have lunch. Ever seen an animal do that? I haven't. If an animal likes you, it likes you with every fiber of its being. If an animal dislikes you, there's nothing you can do to coax it close. So animals tend to be very authentic. Human beings, on the other hand, have the capacity to lie or dissimulate or try to deceive or put on airs or act or whatever. So it seems to me that human beings by very nature are different from animals. Imagine a dog that sees a nice juicy steak on top of the kitchen counter and the adults are gone, the kids are gone, the family's gone for a moment or whatever. The dog sees that juicy piece and says, oh boy, that looks good. I think they left that out just for me. So the dog reaches up, gets up on its hind legs, grabs that piece of meat with its mouth and heads on off. Now just imagine the same dog, you know, out in the corner of the house somewhere, enjoying this tasty morsel, feeling guilty. Oh, you know, the family was really counting on this. This is terrible what I'm doing. I really shouldn't be doing this. You know what? I need to go return this and apologize. Dog ever do that? Not that I know of. You see, human beings are unique in the sense that this sense of law and order, this sense of right and wrong is somehow built into us. It seems like something that, with a few exceptions, every human being is born with to some degree. We see this in games. Have you ever played a game of basketball or a game of baseball and declared a do-over? Now, what is a do-over? A do-over is a game in which there's a dispute as to what is the fair thing to do, what is the right thing to do. And if you can't resolve the dispute, since there's no umpire, if you can't resolve the dispute, then you might say, well, let's do a do-over. In other words, let's go back to where we were before the dispute. Let's run that play again and see what happens. It's fair. Everybody gets an equal chance to do whatever, and let's see what happens. I can remember one time that I was playing basketball. That was a few years ago. I don't do too much of it today anymore, at least not with people half my age. But I remember on this one occasion, we were playing full court basketball, and it was a pickup game, so there was no referee there. We were just making our own calls, you see. And I remember one time I was on the defensive side, and the other team took a shot, and the rebound bounced way out. I was kind of one of the smaller guys. I was only about 6'1.5" an inch, you know, and that makes me the little guy on the basketball court. So the ball bounced way out, and it came right to me, out by the foul line. Okay, so those of you who know a little about basketball, I'll give some detail to make it interesting. So I catch the ball at the foul line, and I realize most of the players are between me and the defensive basket here. And if I can grab this ball and immediately turn and put it on the ground and start heading the other way, there might be only one or at the most two players back on defense. And I could get what we call a fast break. And if I could get past the guy right next to me and get ahead of the field, it might be an easy basket. So all of that was churning in my head in the space of about a 1/16 of a second, because you have to think fast when you're in the basketball court. So I immediately made the turn. I put the ball on the floor. Was dribbling, was heading down toward the basket in the other direction. I caught the fellow who was closest to me on the other team just a little bit off balance. His name was Ron. And he could see that I was going to get by him. And in the course of it, attempting to stop me, his elbow contacted my stomach. And he called foul. Now, usually people call fouls when it's done on them. They don't usually call their own foul on someone else. I mean, it's just the nature of us. We like to favor, our interpretations favor our side, in whatever it is. And when he called that foul, I thought, wow, he's being an honest man. He just elbowed me in the stomach. That's not nice. That's a foul. Now I get to, have the rewards for that. And he said, no, you fouled me. And I was outraged. Are you kidding me? My stomach encounters your elbow, and I'm the one at fault? I'm the one that did this on purpose? I deliberately threw my stomach into your elbow? I don't know about you, but that sounds a little bit crazy. But we started arguing as to, what occurred there and what significance it was, and we never quite resolved it. So we basically called a do-over. You see, human beings have a strong sense of justice, a strong sense that the right thing has to happen. If you fouled me and the right call isn't made, I am enraged. I am incensed because not only am I at a disadvantage, but even more, an injustice has occurred, a serious injustice. And the universe calls upon us to address this injustice. So human beings truly have a sense of justice, a sense that law and order needs to be served. Isn't that what happens when we criticize other people? Well, so-and-so shouldn't have done that. What are we saying? We're saying that there's some kind of standard. There's some kind of law on the basis of which we determine that particular action isn't appropriate. And so we can see very clearly that this person is doing the wrong thing. And when we gossip or we criticize that other person, that is betraying a strong sense of internal legality, that things need to be done in a proper and orderly way. Frankly, it's why we argue with our spouse. More arguments in a marriage occur probably over senses of justice or injustice. Often has to do with money. It's not fair, that you get $4.38 more than I do for fun this month. It's not fair. What do we mean when we say it's not fair? It isn't just. It isn't right. It isn't law and order. You see, things are out of order here if you get that extra $4. And so my point in all of this is that we betray that somehow law is extremely important to us. That if there were no law, if there were no consistency in the universe, that things would be fundamentally out of order. It would not be right. It would not be appropriate. And often when you see somebody caught in a fault of some kind, in the media or in the public eye, when this occurs, there's usually an attempt to justify oneself. Well, it was my predecessor. He left a mess here, and so, it's taken me years to clean it up because it's such a big mess. It's not my fault, And the predecessor is saying, well, look at all that he's done. That's not my fault. And so people are justifying themselves. Why? Because they want it to be understood that they have handled things in a just, a right, a fair kind of a way. So I think it is fairly clear that human beings have a strong need not only to do the right thing, but to be seen to have done the right thing, to be counted right in terms of some larger standard. Seems very, very important to us as human beings. In a sense, what you could say is that all of us want to be counted right in the final judgment. We all have this sense, I think, that down the line there's going to be a reckoning. Down the line there's going to be some kind of a weighing and assessing of whether what we did was right and wrong. And deep in the heart of the human being is a need to be right. That's why we justify ourselves to each other. And ultimately it's on a small scale seeking to be justified before God. This is the concept that is so important to Paul. He's deeply concerned about our justification in the judgment, our justification before God. And this is a message in Romans. You remember we took a look at Romans chapter 1, 2, and 3, and 4 in an earlier module. And in Romans 2, let's go a little bit deeper into a piece of it that we only went over quickly earlier. Romans chapter 2 and verse 1. Therefore, it says, you have no excuse, O man, every one of you who judges. For in passing judgment on another, you condemn yourself because you, the judge, practice the very same things. We know that the judgment of God rightly falls on those who practice such things. Do you suppose, O man, you who judge those who practice such things and yet do them yourself, that you will escape the judgment of God? See, Paul here makes it clear that in the ultimate sense, there is a judgment. There is God's judgment. And in that ultimate judgment, we are all called to account. But notice here he says, you have no excuse, O man, everyone who judges. He's talking about the judgments we pass on each other. You shouldn't have done that. That is wrong, you see. And whenever we pass that kind of judgment, as some have pointed out, when I point this finger, there's 3 other fingers pointing back at me. So whenever I spot someone else and saying, you shouldn't do that, what am I actually saying to myself? I shouldn't do that. If it's wrong for him or her, it's wrong for me. I shouldn't do that. You see, when we criticize other people, when we point the finger and when we say that person is doing it wrong, we are saying, I have a standard. And by that standard, this person has not behaved correctly. And when you're stating that standard, you're not only stating it to that person, you're also stating it to yourself. So that when you, in the end, do some of the same things that person did, then you are coming under your own judgment. And Paul here points out that when we pass judgment on another person, we in a real sense are reaping up a record that will stand one day in the final judgment. So the great human need, I think, ultimately is to be right in the judgment. And that is one of the foundations of the doctrine of salvation in the Bible. It's the concept that there is a standard, there is a law in the universe, there is behavior rules that all of us are supposed to live by, that human beings in general have violated those rules. And because they have, human beings stand in guilt before God. They stand condemned in a higher court. And gaining justification in that higher court becomes a fundamental human need. Now, not everybody experiences this at the same level. There are multiple metaphors for salvation in the Bible, as we pointed out. But this legal metaphor is extremely important for many people, at least. Because there are many people who live with guilt, who live with a strong sense of obligation and a recognition that if all these things are so, then I am not living up to what I ought to be. And that sense of guilt, that sense of estrangement from God on the basis of law is very, very close to the hearts of many, many people. And it's for this reason, I think, that the Bible is so legal in its language. The recognition that there are many, many people who will never be comfortable in a relationship with God unless they understand that somehow this legal obligation has been dealt with. And so in this module, module number 9, we will be exploring the impact of this law concept on Scripture and ultimately on our relationship with Jesus Christ.